Thank you guys for joining me today. Today is the last session of the day from the technical track. Thank you for keeping with us with all the kind of new features and all the content, and hopefully you'll find this session useful. Today I'm going to be talking about DevOps, but before I talk about DevOps, I'll just give you a brief intro about myself. So on the screen you can see my contact details, LinkedIn, Twitter, my blog. If you want to reach out to me after the event with any questions, you are more than welcome. I'll be available also after the session to take any queries, and most importantly, if you have any questions about something I showed during the session, just feel free to ask, because I want to make sure that you guys get the most out of this session as well. So I've been working with the Power Platform, or what used to be called CRM, since version 1.2 about 15 years ago. But more recently, for the last number of 5-7 years or so, I've been also kind of looking at DevOps. So I've been trying to apply the DevOps concepts to the Dynamics platform and the Power Platform. So I wanted to share some of these experiences with you today on how you can implement that for your project and what's the benefit that you can gain from doing that. All right. So why am I talking here about DevOps? I mean, you probably hear DevOps a lot these days. I think initially, when we used to do CRM projects, there was very little time and budget available to do things like automation. But now, I think DevOps is something that everyone wants to adopt, and there are actually roles that people hire DevOps engineers just to kind of focus on that, because it's very difficult to kind of keep up with all the deliveries without having like a decent process in place. So we've seen lots of new features coming today from the platform. We've seen Flow, Power Apps, Canvas apps, etc. So these are very nice and allows us to do lots of things, lots of nice and cool things for the customers. But until we get these features delivered and used by the users, these features don't provide any value to the customers. So where DevOps helps us is try and get these features deployed to the customer in production as early as possible. So on this slide, I've actually kind of demonstrated or showed you all the kind of stages that a DevOps process would go through. So how many of you today have a fully automated process that takes changes from dev to production? Andrew? Nice. Okay. How many of you are interested in adopting that? I know it's been a challenge in the past because skills, tools, the platform being able to do that easily on the platform, but things are changing and it's much easier to do that, as you will see today. So hopefully you'll be able to see how I can do that quite quickly. So think of DevOps as the things that happen between when the time the developer finished something until the so on the left side you have the developer and the requirement, they're doing something, and on the right you have the end user, which is the stakeholder. So think about DevOps as all the things that happen in the middle, and so these are the different stages that you can see on the screen. So planning, I think, is very important, because if we're working on the wrong requirements, then whatever we do after that doesn't really matter, even if we have the best processes. So it's important we get that right. So the next stage, I'm not going to focus too much about planning. Today is more about kind of the technical track, so it's CI/CD. So I'll show you how to implement that. So the next stage is like development. This is where you kind of configure your changes and you commit your changes into source control. And then we have the peer review process, where you get your changes reviewed by another person, just to make sure you're not the only one who knows about these changes. And then we have the CI build, deployment, management of all the environments. How do we get the change to production? And then more importantly, after that, once the change is in production, how do we monitor it? And how do we get feedback from it? So these are the different things, and all of that kind of can be classed as DevOps. So I'll show you some of these today. So some principles about DevOps before I kind of start to go into demos and some more details. So these are quite important, and they pretty much apply to the different technologies that you use. So one of the main principles about DevOps is the fast flow. So we want to make sure that features flow very quickly. from dev to production. So, I've worked in projects where in the past, like 5 years ago, where we used to kind of deploy, Dynamics projects every 6 months or 1 year at best. And I've also worked on projects recently where, we do changes almost every day or every week as well. So things are kind of moving towards that. And if you probably use, any app on your phone, you see changes coming in constantly. So we want to try and, do something similar for Dynamics as well. So fast flow is the first principle, and the second principle is kind of small batch size. So we need to reduce the change to a small change. So if we're kind of bundling, 6 months worth of changes, the chances are if we deploy that to production, things are gonna likely to have problems basically. So trying to kind of break down your changes into small requirements and then trying to remove requirements one at a time from dev to production ideally. Sometimes it's not possible on the Dynamics, but sometimes you can bundle a few user stories together and then ship that as a feature to the production. Next one is automation. If you want to do all of that, we have to automate. How many of you use CRM online today versus the on-premise? Okay, so we have many users using it online. So as you know, with online, you also get kind of new features coming from the vendor as well. So how do you make sure your system, constantly is up to date with these features and it works with these features? So you have to automate your testing. You have to automate kind of all these processes. And then next is minimizing handoffs. So I've worked with lots of projects where, especially big organizations, where you have the development team, you have the testing team, the security team, and then the developers do their job, and then they hand over like a document to the testing team, and then the testing team have no, previous concept of what they need to test, and then they need to spend a lot of time getting themselves up to speed. And sometimes if a tester raises a bug, they don't provide lots of information to the developer. So in DevOps, we want to basically minimize the number of hops between the different teams, and we want to make sure that if we pass something on to the next team, then the next team has all the information they need to be able to do their job without having to go back and forth. So collaboration is obviously important. So try and get everyone involved as early as possible. And then we need to shift left. So how many of you know what shift left means? Is the opposite of shift right? Okay. So traditionally, we tend to kind of push testing to the right, which is like, do our development, do as much development as we can, and then, 1 week before go live, give it to the testing team, and then, let them test it. Or get the security guys involved in the end. So shifting left means basically trying to do things up front or as early as possible. So if you're a developer, you need to do your unit tests, you need to do as much testing as possible. If you're a tester, try and get engaged as early as possible. So trying to move things as early as possible in the life cycle so you can basically find problems as early as possible. And the next thing is, once you do that, you start getting fast feedback. So fast feedback is quite important, and it's not only, so I guess the most important feedback is to get feedback from the users. So trying to give them something as early as possible is important, but also if you want to pass something on from dev to test, then you want to make sure that you give it to them as early as possible so they can get feedback. So one of the projects I've been working on, for example, we deploy to testers like every day, sometimes multiple times during the day, and then they are able to see all the changes as quickly as possible, test them, and then feed that back to the development team. So these are the principles. So I guess, what does it mean for your teams? And in this slide just kind of summarizes everything I've said. But yeah, I mean, we need to kind of start automating things. We need to, be able to react more quickly, and we need to, in some cases, kind of change our culture, the way we look at change, and try and be more agile. So now I'm going to talk about, CRM development or, Dynamics Power Platform development. So if you've been doing kind of .NET applications, I think things are quite simple. You kind of, if you create, for example, a console app, you do it on your desktop, you write it, compile it, and then, everything is easy. But when we're working with Dynamics, we tend to have different roles making changes to the system on the project. So we tend to have like the customizers who are going to the UI and then making changes, who may not necessarily want to go down to the level of making changes in code, but they understand the business very well and they're able to kind of tweak the screens very easily. And then they do their changes, they put them in the solution, and then we have the developers who kind of take the extensions to the next level, so they're kind of able to build complex integrations, custom JavaScript functionality. And developers work in Visual Studio, so they're making their changes in Visual Studio and then contributing to the solution as well. And now we have some things that are done by the customizers, some things that are done by the developer, and how do we get all of these things together and then have a decent process that allows us to ship these changes easily going forward. So that's what we're gonna look at today. So I presume all of you are familiar with the solution concept, so I don't need to go over that into too much detail. So basically at a high level, a solution is just a package. It allows you to put all the changes that you do in that package, whether it's the schema or the UI, and then you're able to export that package to other dev environments or ship it to a test environment as a managed solution, as per the kind of recent recommendation from Microsoft. So the only things I want to highlight is I think solutions are becoming more and more important. So what you can do with solutions is increasing. So for example, in the recent release, we're able to now add flows to the solutions. We're able to add Canvas apps. We're able to add PCF controls and expect more things to come into the solution. So being able to kind of use solutions and transport changes to be able to automate things is quite important. Okay. All right. So today I'm going to show you a number of patterns around how you can work within your project. You may be using one of them today and it may work for you. I will also show you what's the kind of pattern that is kind of recommended to use going forward. But depending on what project you're on and how many people you have in your team, you may be able to adapt one or more depending on what you do. So the goal of these patterns is to shift changes from dev to kind of different environments up to production and to be able to kind of integrate the changes between the different members of the team. So the first pattern is called the kind of coordinated export, which I see some small projects use today. So basically you have one dev environment and then you have a number of developers working in that dev environment on a solution. So you have a CRM solution at version 1, it's linked to the master branch, and then at some point when you're ready, you export that solution and you move it into your test environment. And then ready is, can mean a number of things. So I mostly see projects when they do this, they either export it at the end of the day or at the end of the sprint, and then they push it into the testing team. And then you import the same solution into production or pre-production, and then you increase the version to version 2, and then you deploy that version 2, and then you take it all the way through, and you keep increasing the version and pushing that solution all the way through. Now, the problem with that approach is if you have multiple developers working in the dev environment, it's very difficult to arrive at the point where you can safely export the solution from the dev environment. So, for example, one person could be working on the contact, and then another person could be working on the account, or they could be working even on the same kind of form in the contact. So one person may be done, the other person is not done yet. So either you have to take unfinished changes or you have to kind of wait for the next person as well. So it requires a lot of coordination to get a clean solution out of the dev environment, basically. So on the next slide, I've summarized some of the pros and cons of this. So this is quite easy to set up. Even from an automation view, it's very easy to set up. But it can cause you some challenges, and you can get defects deployed into the test environment unnecessarily. Okay. How many of you today use Azure DevOps? A number of people. Okay, lots of people. I presume. So, how many of you use Azure DevOps for builds and releases? Okay. That's good. So now I'm going to show you how a typical pipeline would look like. I know not everyone uses Azure DevOps. I know some organizations use Jenkins or TeamCity or whatever tools are approved by the organization. I think using Azure DevOps, you get a lot of out-of-the-box integration to the, Azure and Dynamics. But you can do the same thing with other technologies as well. So you have the developer on one side and you have the production environment on the other side, as you can see. So you basically, start by the developer configuring on the dev environment, and then they check in their changes into source control. So in a DevOps setup, you want as much in source control as possible. You don't want to rely on things, in documents or in environments or etc. So you want as much things as you can in source control. So typically when a developer checks in their change, that triggers a build. And if you've not used builds before, for example, build is just a process that runs on a server and it does a number of steps. So if your goal is to export a solution from dev and you do that on your developer workstation, in the build server, that build server would export that solution for you, and so you don't have to do it yourself. And it runs in a kind of consistent environment because every developer may have a different machine, and sometimes you update your NuGet packages or you change or install another tool, and that may impact what you get in the solution. So it's important to kind of do that kind of stuff on the build server. So basically all the build is doing is basically just pulling things from source control, running a unit test, and I think Jordi had a session earlier today on unit testing. So your build can run all these tests to make sure every time someone checks in, everything continues to work. And then the main output of the build is your packages. So at the end of the build, you should get a number of packages that you can deploy to all the other environments and production potentially. So you get one package and then you deploy that all the way through. So because we have testing, we also have some indication of the quality of that solution. So if you see some tests are failing, you may think, okay, I'm going to wait for the next build, etc. But the idea is to get a package and some idea of whether that package is going to work for me or not. So once the build is done, you kind of tend to trigger like a deployment automation. So that's the next process. So you trigger the deployment automation, and then that uses the package and then deploys it to a number of environments. But it's not good to just stop there because once you deploy something, you also want to make sure that that works in that environment. So you tend to run another set of tests on that environment to make sure what you've deployed is actually working. And then once you're happy with that, then you can start promoting this change to the rest of the environment until it ends up in production and to the user. When I say promoting changes, in an ideal scenario, you're just clicking a button, whether that's the environment owner or your operations team just clicking a button, and that should take all the change to the next environment. Any questions so far? Okay, hope it's all clear. Okay, so enough slides. I'm going to start to do some demos now. All right. So let's do something in Azure DevOps. Okay. Let me just make sure you can see the screen. Okay, that looks a bit odd. Okay. Hopefully that looks better. Okay. So if you haven't used Azure DevOps for automation, Azure DevOps is basically the new term for VSTS, or TFS used to be on premise. So it gives you end-to-end DevOps capabilities. So that starts from creating your requirements in Azure DevOps, and then creating your source so you can use Git in Azure DevOps, and then after that you use your build and release and testing to get that features built, deployed and tested, and then available to the user. So you can do all of that in Azure DevOps. What I'm going to do today, I think, is just to start with, I'm going to give you a simple demo in case you haven't created anything in Azure DevOps of how to create an automated build. How many would be interested in seeing how to create a build and release in Azure DevOps in here? Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so So I have a solution in this environment called the XRM CI sample. So it just contains, some customizations to contacts, web resources, and plugins, custom workflow activities. There's not a lot of functionality in there, but the purpose here is just to show that you can move that solution with the various components to different environments. So let's go back to Azure DevOps. So I'm going to create a new build. So let's see what we can do. So we talked about the first pattern, which is kind of exporting and importing. So let's do that using Azure DevOps instead of having to do that manually. So what I'm going to do is it's asking me where is the source. So in this case, I don't really care about the source because all I'm doing is just exporting. But when we get to plugins and other things, we may need to pay a bit more attention to the source. So yeah, let's say I'm going to take the source from Azure DevOps. It's asking me for the template. There isn't any template for Dynamics. You can easily create these if you wanted to. All right. So the first thing is you have to decide, where do you run this job? Where are you going to run this job? So if the one option is to run it in Azure. So as part of Azure DevOps, is give you some, out-of-the-box agents that you can run in Azure. If you have CRM on-prem, you're probably better off installing an agent locally on your network because that has access to your CRM instance. But really for debugging purposes, you can actually install an agent on your development machine if you wanted to, because that's the easiest and the quickest way to get things worked and debug them quite quickly. So this morning I've actually installed an agent. It only took me 5 minutes. All you have to do is just download a zip and then just connect it to Azure DevOps. So that agent is running on my machine. So I'm going to say actually, for this one, I'm going to run it on the dev agent, which is the one running on here. So the next step is to list all the things that you want your build to do. So before I do that, Azure DevOps is a very extensible platform. So it supports other technologies as well, like Java, Node.js, but also allows you to deploy extensions from the marketplace. So if you're working with the Power Platform, then you go into the marketplace and then you type, for example, CRM, and you can tag things, and it gives you a number of different extensions that you can use for your automation. So the one I'm going to be showing you today is called Dynamics 365 Build Tools, and that's the one that I created. It's open source, but you can also use any other extension from the different kind of community or the partners as well. So you can mix and match between them to kind of do what you need to do. So this one comes with lots of tasks at the moment to do different things. So you'll see some of them today. So I've already installed that in my environment. So all I have to do is now start adding these tasks into the build. So I've done this extension about 2 years ago. So the tasks are still prefixed with MSCRM. But they're quite easy to find. You just type MSCRM and then you can see. So the first thing is to add the tool installer, and all of what this does is just copies all the tool to the agent. So you don't have to keep downloading them for every single task. So it just optimizes the process. So the next step is what you typically do in your environment is you want to update the version of your solution, for example. So there is a task called set version. So let's look at that. So it's asking me for a connection string. So you can just type in the connection string in here, but it's not really the best idea. So what you normally do is you go into your variables, and you've got these defined somewhere else, and they can be managed by an environment administrator, etc. So I'm going to export from my dev environment, so I just say link this build to my dev environment, and then you can see all the different combinations. You can see the password is secure. So you've got everything linked up now. So let's go back into the tasks. I've prepared this kind of small list so I don't make any typing mistakes. So the first thing is asking you for the connection string, so you just get the connection string from the variables. The next one is the solution name. So again, just put the solution name you want to export. Sorry, not here. And then the next one is the version. So I could hard code the version in here as well, but it's not really a good idea. So every time the build runs, it will normally give you a new version. However, it gives you like a date and time. So what I need to do really is just, change that into a different version. So I say I'm actually interested in, let's say, I don't know, 5.0, and then that R number is gonna keep changing. I'm not sure whether you're able to kind of easily see that in the back, but yeah, you should be able to see like the version number. So then all I have to do is, when I set the version, is just say, actually, when you update the version of the solution, just use this, build number. And then what you want to do after that is you want to export the solution. So export solution. Again, it's going to ask you for the connection string, so I'm just going to reuse the connection string. So that's another advantage of not hard coding the connection string, because you'll end up having to type it all the way through. Solution name, again, you could use a variable name for the solution name as well, but I'm not expecting to use it that much. And then it will ask you whether you want managed or managed. In this case, just to speed things up, I'm just going to export a managed solution. It's asking you where to put the solutions. I'm just going to put it in a file on the server. You get some advanced options like you get in the UI, like whether you want to export additional settings. So everything pretty much you can do using the UI, you should be able to get, the option here. And I think most of the things you can do from the UI, there is an SDK for it. So you should be able to kind of automate most of the operations. So once you exported the solution into that folder, basically what you want to do is you want to publish that as an artifact. So I just do, I think there's a task called publish artifacts. Let's have a look, publish build artifacts. I think that's the one. So basically it's going to ask you where do you want to publish your artifacts from. So in this case, I've exported my solution to this folder, so it kind of makes sense to publish that folder. It's asking you for the name. I don't know. Let's do 365. And then, it's asking you for the build as well. We need to give the build a name. Okay. So I think we've got everything ready. So we've said we want to update the version, export it. So all I have to do now is really just queue and run this. So you get the option to override where this is going to run. So I'm just going to use this dev agent. Hopefully it's still working. Okay. So let's see how it goes. Any questions so far? Okay. So hopefully it's not going to take too long. I think one of the things about running locally is it's quite fast to get. Sometimes when you run in the hosted one, you have to wait a little bit. So you can see this is already running. So it's already exporting the solution. So hopefully, that will work. So go ahead.
Can this tool generate data from a previous state of CRM solution and new updates to publish only that components that were changed? Not the whole solution, only data, only previous state and changes to new change, from release to release.
So you want to publish only the components that have changed?
Yes. Just to publish only components that were changed during the
because sometimes
deployment step.
Because sometimes the publish times out, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it possible?
So if you are doing unmanaged solutions, I mean, in my case, I only use unmanaged solutions in dev, so I don't really have this problem. Yeah, but if you deploy unmanaged solutions somewhere else and you need to only publish these changes, I don't have anything in the tasks at the moment. There is an SDK API that allows you to only specify the things that you want to publish. And I know there is a request on GitHub to add that functionality. So I think that will come in at some point, but it's just not there yet. I think at the moment you just have to, either publish all or just write something yourself. Yeah. Yeah. So the build has finished. So let's have a look. So if we look in here at the artifacts, so we can see the solution's been exported, and the version should have been updated. If we look at the dev environment, we refresh again. No, this is not that one. Let's have a look. Yeah, you can see the version is 5.001. So next time will be 5.002. So every time you want to export a solution, now you just click on Q, and then that will do the job for you. So quickly, I'm just going to show you how you can release that solution to your QA environment. So let's create a release. So again, it will ask you for a template. I'm just going to say empty. So this is very similar to what we had before. So you just have to decide what environment you want to deploy your release into. So I just do test in this case. Actually, let's do this one. Production. So the first thing is you have to decide what is it that you want to deploy. So which build? So we just did a build now. So let's have a look. So it's called 365 Kyiv. So it's fine. Let's add that. So this is the build I'm going to be deploying. So the next thing is, what do you want to do during your deployment on this environment? But before we do that, I'm going to, again, link my variables to that specific environment. So since I'm deploying to production, I'm going to link the production environment, and I'm going to say, actually, link that to production. And then let's have a look. So let's add some more tasks in there. So let's do MSCRM tools again. Okay. And so the next thing that we need to do is just import the solution. So there is another task called import solution. So we exported the solution from the dev environment, so now we just need to import it. So again, very simple. Just take the connection string from here and put it in there. So next question is, where is the zip file that you want to import? So you already linked the build to this environment, so you just have to specify the location of the zip file. And then there's a number of options whether you want to publish workflows and override customizations, all the standard stuff you get.
Can we have params in this address? Because, for example, if you kind of pass name of the solution as a param, can you include this inside address of the folder? So imagine, for example, that you have variable names for solutions, like solutions for March release or solutions for April release.
Okay.
Can we pass these names as parameters or solution file address?
The file name, yes. What you can do is when you start the release, you can specify the name.
It's variable, yeah. But can we include parameter inside file location when we are linking artifacts folder? Right there, inside solution file. Can we specify parameter with location there?
You can specify a parameter, like a dynamic parameter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And you can get, the other way to do it is you get your build to generate a file, and then you just read it from there. So your build knows what you want to deploy, yeah.
And I have a question about, can we deploy a plugin assembly or web resource, run some kind of unit testing before we will export our solution to import it to the other environment?
Yeah, I'll show you that in 5 minutes.
Great.
Maybe longer, but okay. So I think that's pretty much ready. This one is quite simple. We just want to import the solution. This is the file. So I think I'm just gonna save that. So then you can just create a new release, and then it will ask you, what version do you want to deploy, what environments do you want. So you can choose whatever version you want. So if you have multiple versions, you can just decide which version you want to deploy. And then I just click on create. So yeah, we'll let this run for a while, and then we will come back to it. Any questions so far? Okay. So let's go through. Sorry, back to some slides. Okay.
And even more, as far as I know, we can attach parameters from the Key Vault, from Azure Key Vault.
Yes, yes. So I mean, sometimes it's very useful to have the parameters in Key Vault because, for example, the password, you may share this password between a number of other things. So you don't want to come to VSTS and then Azure DevOps and then change it and then go to Azure Key Vault and change it for something else. So ideally you want to have it in one place. So yes, you can put things in the Key Vault and then you can import them into here, which is quite nice because you can put a bit more control on the Key Vault, especially if you have people that look after that for production. Okay, so I'm just quickly gonna go through the next pattern. But before I do that, I think one of the important things to show is solution segmentation. So solution segmentation is a concept that's been introduced since Dynamics 365. It's quite important. So I still see lots of projects deploying big solutions, especially if you want to move things between dev environments and if you want to deploy patches to production. I think solution segmentation is quite powerful. So what it allows you to basically to do is instead of adding the whole form and the whole entity to the solution, you can add like individual attributes or views, etc. So it's quite useful because that, if you add the whole thing, then you get lots of dependencies, and then you try and import it if the environment doesn't have that dependency, and then the solution takes longer to import, and then there is more chance for error. So ideally, just add in the solution what you need. And because of that feature, we can do something slightly differently. So with the second pattern that I'm showing is you have your dev environment, and then I've added another environment called build. So think of the dev environment as the environment that doesn't have the environment where you're kind of creating your things. They are in progress, and the build environment is where you have your stable things. So all the developers have to do is when they finish something, put it in that transport solution, and then you move that transport solution over to the build environment and then add it to your other solution. So anything that is not yet ready is still in the dev environment. Anything that is completed is in the build environment. I mean, if you have two people working on the same form, then it's unavoidable. But then that's where you can use your communication to kind of work around that problem. And after that, you kind of push that solution as before all the way through, and you keep kind of incrementing the version. So just quickly, the advantage of this scenario is that you can control what you move out of your dev environment. So it allows you to move changes that are finished and avoid having bugs in your QA environment because you exported some changes that are not done. I think plugins and web resources are a bit trickier because if you have one plugin assembly and then you have 5 developers and they're all working on that plugin assembly, like even if you're working on one plugin and you're working on another plugin, it's difficult. You end up overriding each other. So I'll show you in the next demo what you can do. So for this demo, actually you can see the release succeeded before we go into the demo. So you can see that solution got imported, and you can see some more information in here. You can download all the standard logs you get when you import the solution manually, and the same Excel file that you get with the errors, you can get it here as well. But let's skip through that. So let's go into the another build, which I called sources sync. So let's just edit that and just have a look. So because we're dealing with plugins now, we have to compile the code. So the first step is building the solution, and then it's running all the unit tests that you've seen before in the previous session. And after that, I don't want to export the plugins that are in the dev environment or the build environment because somebody could be in the middle of doing something. So what this task does, it just updates all the plugin assemblies in that environment, and it can update all the steps as well using a JSON file. And then after that, you can do the same with workflow activities. You can do the same with web resources. So basically, you're syncing your assemblies and web resources from your source into that environment before you export the solution. And then the rest of the steps is just very similar. So if I was doing a plugin in dev and I've deployed a plugin, say, that was in progress. After I run this build, that plugin will be overridden, and then when the solution exported will be a bit cleaner. You don't have to do this on your dev environment. You can do this on your build environment, because sometimes if you do this on the dev environment, you end up interrupting the developers. So sometimes you can just ship, the broken plugin to the build environment and then fix it in there from source. Okay. All right. So let's jump back into the slides. So the next pattern is called from source. And this is something that you'll probably see more and more, especially with the Power Platform, because that's the way things are moving forward, and that's the way kind of proper DevOps works. So we want all our changes in source control. I mean, with the previous patterns, we had our customizations still in the dev environments. With this one, everything is in source. So how many of you use the solution packager? Okay. So you're kind of familiar with it. You're probably familiar with some of the issues as well. So basically, if you've not used it before, solution packager is quite simple. You export a solution which gives you a zip file, and then you run the solution packager, and instead of the zip file, you get lots of files, which you can see the details of what that solution contains. And then you put these files in source control, and then at some point later in the future, you use the solution packager again to zip the files back, and then you can import that into your environment. So you can also link your assemblies from source. So you can generate the assemblies and the web resources from your source instead of using the solution packager. So it's basically just packing and unpacking. So how does this look in terms of our pipeline? So yeah, this is how it looks. Basically, you have a number of developers or teams working, and they're doing their own changes. So previously we used to export from dev and then deploy into build, but now developers are exporting on their own machines and they're checking into source control. So my build system now is just relying on source control, and then it's generating the solution from source control and then deploying all the way through. And then when the next developer is ready, they check in their change into source control, and then we generate another solution, let's say with a different version, and that goes all the way through again. So imagine if every check-in was a story. You could actually promote every story all the way through if it passed all the testing, if that was something that the business needed. And DevOps is more about being ready. I mean, it doesn't mean we have to deploy 5 times a day to our users. It means we should be ready to deploy if the user thinks that feature is really needed now. Okay. So these are some of the pros and cons, but I'm going to try and walk through the demo of these, but I'll, to kind of, okay. So let's just quickly show you how that looks in Visual Studio. So instead of going to the CRM environment, now I have a folder for my solution, so it has all the customizations in there. So it has the plugin assemblies, but you can see in the plugin assemblies, I don't really have anything because I want to generate them from source. And you can see I've been working with the contact entity, so I've got some information about the contact. So yeah, so if I want to see what's changed, for example, in this form, I can go and view history, and it will show me, so for example, yesterday, I had the whole contact entity in that solution. And I was importing it to another environment and didn't have the LinkedIn solution. So it was giving me an error, but I wasn't using actually the LinkedIn functionality. So what I did is I just removed these features from the form. So you can do kind of compare with previous, and you can see the different things that I removed. Sometimes with the forms you tend to get a lot of false positives because it sometimes reshuffles things around when you export. But I think these things are well known, and I think Microsoft is working on making that solution packager give you a bit more cleaner results. So if I'm a developer, for example, I would typically go in here and not this one. I could go into and run a PowerShell script like this, which will export the solution and then automatically unpack my changes into source control. So I go to the CRM environment, I configure my solution, and when I'm ready, I just export from here, and then I can view my changes and I check them in. I think I would like to show you actually a bit more complex deployment process. But any questions on the solution packager or that source-based process? Okay, I think we've got about 5-10 minutes, so I'm gonna carry on. Okay. Okay. So we've talked about solutions, and I think solutions are quite important because they're the core thing, but there's lots of other things that we need to do apart from solutions. So one of the things is how do we know that our solutions are working correctly? And sometimes we tend to review our solutions. So how many of you use the Power Apps Checker? Okay, 2 people. So Power Apps Checker is a new tool that's provided by Microsoft. You basically give it a solution, and it will tell you, it will analyze it against a number of rules, and it will tell you whether it thinks there are some issues with that solution. So some of the things it looks at is plugin assemblies, it looks at web resources, and looks at some of your configurations. And then it also rates your issues as well. So it gives you high, low, and it gives you whether it's a performance issue or a kind of backwards compatibility, deprecation issue. So it gives you that information. And then as a developer, you can decide whether you want to fix these, whether they're relevant to you or not. I think the reason I'm mentioning it in DevOps is because inspecting our solutions and testing is quite important. So we need to be able to run this on our solution regularly to check whether we have any issues. So if you haven't seen it, basically I'm just going to quickly show you what it does. So if you go to the Power Apps portal, you can install it from the Power Apps portal, and then once you run it, basically it gives you a zip file like this, and then you can open it. And then it gives you like a nice graph about the issues that you have, like how many high, how many low, and then you can go to see the results in here. So in this example, for example, I had a plugin that was retrieving all columns in the code, which is not the most efficient way in most cases. I've also had a SDK message that was filtering stuff that wasn't filtering on attributes on updates. So it kind of gives you some of these issues that maybe if you have a large code base, maybe you don't have time to keep up with the changes. So it's quite useful, and I think there's some APIs coming as well. So you can run this as part of your build, and you can fail your builds if a number of these issues are above a certain level. So let me just quickly wrap up, I guess. Okay. So just a few things to bear in mind. I think solutions is one thing, but there's lots of other things you have to worry about. You have to worry about the data, backup restores, service endpoints. So ideally, we're using too many technologies now, and because they give us value very quickly. So we can use Azure Functions, we can use solutions, we can use Flow. So it's important that we have a good DevOps process that covers all of these. So we can make a change, and then we can easily deploy all of these to all the different environments. Data is one of them. There is the configuration migration tool that comes with the SDK that can deploy our configuration data. It's good for sample data, and it's good for configuration data. You can use other tools as well to do the data, but it's important you get your data and source control as well, not just your kind of code. And there is the package deployer as well. So any steps that you need to do apart from the solution, you can use the package deployer. So the package deployer is like a container where you put your solution, you put your data, and you put some custom code that can run before or after the import of the solution. And then you can run that package on an environment and should ideally do your deployment end to end. And you can run it in PowerShell as well. Finally, just some tips about production releases, because it's quite important to get that production release right. So always back up your production instance. If you're using online, you can just generate a backup from the portal or use the API. Test your rollback process. Make sure that you're comfortable with the rollback process. Test your release on a pre-production environment. So I see lots of projects taking a backup, restoring that to another environment, running the release on there. So you may be deploying things in dev, but you may be deploying individual solutions. So it's important you run the actual solution that you want to deploy on a pre-prod copy. And then you need to worry, obviously, all the change management and release notes. So one of the things I do as well is I generate my release notes from Azure DevOps with the list of things that get deployed to that environment. And then you obviously need to monitor your changes. Okay. So I think this is just a summary just to show you the value of DevOps. So if we're able to adopt DevOps successfully, we can have the ability to deploy changes more frequently, but also make sure that the changes that we deploy are actually working and add value to the user. So any final questions before I wrap up? By the way, all the samples that I showed today, they're on GitHub. So the source code, the open source tool that does the automation, they're all in the GitHub in the marketplace, so you can use them for your projects quite easily. Any questions from anyone? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, sorry.
What would be your advice to when we are working with rollback mechanics, when we are using unmanaged solutions? So how to track changes which we are holding in unmanaged solutions to successfully roll back them?
To roll back unmanaged solutions?
Unmanaged.
Okay, that's quite difficult. I mean, the easiest way to roll back if you have unmanaged solutions is if do you use on-premise or online?
On-premise.
On-premise. Then taking a SQL backup before you do your deployment.
So maybe there's prettier way.
I mean, SQL backup is easier and it's the most reliable way. I mean, you can try and see what you've changed, but you would have to delete the things that you've added, and then you have to deploy the previous version of them. So things can get quite complex. Yeah.
I think if you have stored your solution as a code, as check-in customizations,
Yeah.
you could just roll back to the previous commit and push the check-in the previous version and push this version to the new environment. And that's it.
But then you have to
delete. Yeah.
You have to clean environment for that, because if you are using a managed solution, it will not delete, for example, updated fields.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Additional fields and attributes.
You can delete them later. I mean, it's not the most blocking thing, I guess, if you add something and you delete it later.
Because, for example, if you are adding a field with the wrong type, so you just check it and you've seen that you use option set instead of string. If you're using the same name, it will cause conflict.
Yeah. Next time use patches and manage solutions. Any other question?
Is it possible just to roll out a backup of solution, backup of environment as a rollback one? For rollback one, is it possible just to roll out a backup of environment before you did a production deployment?
Just to go in the portal and back up the environment?
Yeah.
I think that covers your CRM bit. If you're deploying other things around it, then you may have to worry about these as well. But from a CRM point of view, it kind of contains most of the things that you will need to roll back, because everything is almost stored in that database that you back up. Yeah.
What is your recommendation for reference data transfer?
Reference data transfer.
Except Microsoft tool.
I think the advantages of the Microsoft tool is quite easy to use, especially by developers without having to learn new skills. I've seen, other projects using like Kingsway software and SSIS. You get more control, but then you have to worry about the order, and you have to know how to use SSIS.
But Microsoft tool is probably not would handle in not handling in a good way things like business units, root business units, and some things like that.
Yeah, we use it for business units actually. It depends how many business units you have as well. I think I had to add some additional codes. So after it runs, it scans the log files and it generates a summary to tell you exactly what went wrong. So it's basically a script that inspects all the logs and tries to give you a summary of what went wrong, and then you can make a decision whether you run it again or whether that is enough. So basically, I've built the ability into the pipeline to be able to rerun that in case there are errors, because sometimes you get timeouts on certain records, sometimes certain records doesn't go in. So normally the next time you run it, it works, but you can get some exceptions sometimes as well. But yeah, I mean, I store the data and source control as well. So if I get any issues, I can go back to source control and see, okay, what records somebody has added, and then it gives me some idea on why things might be not going as expected. Okay? All right, I'll be available after if you have any questions, but thank you again and enjoy the rest of the event.
Smart, less stress, joy of success.